Hi, my name is Lindsay Francis, and this is the development of language in culturally and linguistically diverse students. According to David and Yvonne Freeman, there are two views of second language acquisition, the learning view or the acquisition view. In the learning view, language is taught like a subject in school would be taught, very intentional, a conscious process. But with the acquisition view, language is acquired subconsciously as people are exposed to language in a variety of situations in and out of school. According to Patricia Kuhl in her TED Talk, the critical period hypothesis kind of states that children are better able to acquire languages during a critical period in their life, the age of birth to 6 years of age, over, an adult. What she found was that babies, especially, between 0 and 8 months of age, are able to discriminate between sounds of all languages in the world, which is pretty cool. They are taking statistics on all of the sounds that they're hearing during this time, the critical period. And right around the time of 8 to 10 months, the brain starts to change and focus just solely on the ones that they're hearing. So it's not as likely to pick up or discriminate on sounds like new sounds that they're introduced to after that. For language learners, there are 6 stages of second language acquisition. The pre-production or silent period, where they're not using the language at all, just kind of taking everything in. The early production stage, where they begin to speak using short words and sentences. The speech emergent stage, where speech is more frequent with longer sentences. And then the beginning fluency stage is where they feel fairly fluent with speech in social situations and begin to be more challenged by new context and academic language. Intermediate fluency comes after that, where the social situation fluency is definitely there. And they are getting better at the new situations in academic areas, but still have some gaps in vocabulary and expressions. The final stage of second language acquisition is called advanced fluency, and that's where the student is comfortable and communicates fluently in all contexts, but may only have, very few errors with idiomatic expressions they're not familiar with because of cultural differences and things like that. If we look at language skills specifically for these culturally and linguistically diverse students, it's important for teachers to know the difference between basic interpersonal communication skills and cognitive academic language proficiency. So basic interpersonal communication skills are the social skills, the language that they use with friends and just to function in everyday society. It is easy for a student to appear fluent in their new language with social situations, but once academics gets involved, the context is not there for them in a lot of situations, and so it's harder for them to understand and kind of utilize higher order thinking skills to process things they're less familiar with. Oral language proficiency is something that needs to be taken into consideration too when working with CLD students. This oral language proficiency starts to develop at a young age, before students even make it to school. And if a student is strong in their first language with their OLP skills, that can transfer over. That is a good basis for them to kind of grow off of. And those skills in their L2 will still continue to develop, but they might have to develop their oral and written skills at the same time, so they will slightly lag behind their peers. Students who immigrate, later in their life, though, maybe into the middle school and high school years, will have a lot more to catch up on and struggle a bit more than like primary grade students. Word level reading is another area to consider. Strong decoders in their L1 will be better at decoding in L2. And what I thought was really interesting was that children who begin to learn their second language in primary grades don't differ in their abilities from the native speaking counterparts. So what that means for me is that my students in first grade should all be kind of performing about the same level if they're receiving the same instruction from me. And if a language learner is needing interventions, I can provide them with the same ones I would do for my native speakers. For text reading fluency, that's a little bit more difficult for language learners because the oral language proficiency is so important for reading text fluently. If they can decode quickly and if they do have those oral language skills, then it frees up space to be able to focus on comprehension. But if they do have trouble with oral language proficiency, then they might lag behind in this text reading fluency. So something important for me to remember in my classroom is if students are doing timed comprehension tests, that I really need to consider, if those results are accurate. I know we have an iStation test in school, and that is timed for all of our learners, but that might not be something, that might not be a best teaching practice when it comes to our English language learners. For reading comprehension, the difference between lower and upper grades for language learners is in lower grades, it's a little bit easier because we're just learning to read. So it's focusing on decoding number and word fluency, spelling skills, less dependent on, that fluency that is kind of hard for students as they go on. But in upper grades, they're reading to learn. So now that's where the CALP comes in, where they have to understand all of that academic language and use those higher order thinking processes to draw meaning from the things that they're encountering. They might, encounter more complex structures. And these students, if they have an insufficient oral language proficiency, they might not be able to progress as fast as their other peers, and so they could fall behind. What all of this means, though, is that it is important for teachers to view each student as an individual and realize there are so many factors that kind of come into play when developing language and finding success in school. So a quote that I really liked and wanted to end with was, "Be cognizant of cultural differences and differences in attributions that may affect the framework people use for understanding and interpreting learning difficulties." So we can best serve our students by just knowing them and knowing their background and their abilities and where they come from. And those are my references. Thanks for listening.